Hello, BookTube, and welcome to the Future History Project. This is a project that myself and a couple other booktubers are hosting to read Isaac Asimov's Future History. And there are a number of readers, subscribers that are following along as well. And I've been reading Isaac Asimov's memoirs, his autobiography, and last time I spoke about him in a sort of chronological sense, we left him at 12 years old. And he was just turning 12 years old in 1932, born in 1920. Uh, he um, he was born in Petrovichy in Russia. His parents came to the United States in New York City in 1922. And Isaac Asimov basically grew up in Brooklyn, and his father eventually, in the early 20s, bought a candy store, sold the candy store, bought other stores, and so forth. So by 1932, he was sort of they'd sort of bought their near their last. A couple of years that they moved around a little more with new stores, trying to find better locations and so forth. But he was precocious and very smart. And by 1932, at the age of 12, he was then going to enter a high school. And he was young. Normally, he would have been about 15 years old, so he was quite young. Now, his father wanted him to be a doctor. Uh, Being from a Jewish family, the tradition in Europe was that the boys went into medicine, and the girls married into medicine. So Isaac, being a dutiful son at the time, wanted the same. So they had to get a good grounding for him in high school so he could get into eventually medical school. And they decided on sending him to uh, Boys High School of Brooklyn. And they excelled in mathematics. And up until this point, Isaac was very, very smart in class, usually the smartest student in class or the school. When he entered the Boys High School of Brooklyn, he found that he wasn't quite the smartest. Average wise, he maintained sort of a 93% average, and there were other boys that maintained sort of 98 average. And he found out that he was no mathematician, and he also because there were things that took him a while to figure out, and economics as well was another one that just sort of didn't really suit him very well. And but he was 12 and a half when he started actually school. I'm going to refer to some notes here. But also 1932 was a year that he became aware of politics, basically. He says in his autobiography, and he supported Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1932. Now, he was in the boys' school, so his formative years now were not in contact with girls, so it was a boys' school, and it was even less so because after school he would have to come home and sometimes do a Sunday paper route for his parents' store, and then work in the store as well. And let's see here. Yeah, it says his parents moved around quite a bit in like 32, 33. And then where they moved in 33, he was sort of on a border, so he was able to get another library card, and he notes this because he was able to take out more books, so he had two talked himself into getting, or he talked the library into giving him a card, even though he wasn't quite in their area. And and then they moved out of what they were in a Jewish area to a more Catholic area, and then he began to see some anti-Semitism. And obviously this was the time of the rise of Nazism, and he became aware of that as well through the news. And it was also the time where his father got a radio for the store, and he listened with his sister. Oh, but well, actually, sorry, no. They had a radio in the store, and that's where they could only listen to it. But his father got a radio for the apartment, and him and his sister started listening to it in about 33, and they listened to Little Orphan Annie. He remembers Jack Armstrong, which was a short 15, I think, minute. It lasted from early 30s to early 50s. I think the full title was Jack Armstrong, All-American Boy. He just had these adventures around the world he would go to, and do amazing adventures. And he also liked Buck Rogers in the 25th Century, Jack Benny Show, which comedian from 30s right up and then finally into TV, and Eddie Cantor, another comedian, singer. And he notes that his favorite, it wasn't hard to figure out, was Buck Rogers. And now, because he had to use subway to get to school and travel a little farther, he noticed the newsstands, and he wrote down, and he always thought that there'd be the newsstands, these little huts that were in the subway, where it would be so nice to be able to put down the flap, have a little cot in there, turn on the light, and lay down and read the magazines and newspapers while there's the rumble of the subway going by. And he remembers that and thought that would be so good to be able to do that. And then also too, during this time, he puts down that he won the right to be able to be out occasionally at nights, where his parents were always very protective, but he was able to get out a little bit from the store. And he did meet a girl in the neighborhood. He went to see a film or two, and this was the time that he got interested in baseball. But he couldn't see games, but he read the newspapers and listened to radio. And he had a notebook, and he made all these charts of all the scores of baseball games. And his favorite team was the Giants, but the locally it was the Dodgers. But then about a year later, he wasn't so interested in baseball. So it was for a while that he was very obsessed with it, and as I say, making charts and everything. And he had eccentricities. His parents sort of noted, because at this point he was able, prior to being in high school, he was only allowed to take 2 books out of the library at a time. But it changed to be more adult, and he was able to access the adult books as well. Basically everything in the library. And he was able to take 3 books out. So he would walk down the street, book under one arm, book under the other arm, and reading a book. And it got people talking and noticing, and he got scolded by his mother for doing that. And he also, like, a lot of times never thanked people in the store so much. He was daydreaming or reading, didn't pay attention, so he got in trouble for that. But there was one eccentricity that he felt that he couldn't share with anybody. He liked going to a local cemetery, and he would sit and read there because it was quiet. But then he used to whistle while he was there, and it was something that was a lifelong habit at times. But he would whistle, and he got scolded by the caretaker for whistling in the cemetery. And he would also he continued to have trouble in school in the sense that because he was precocious, he was bored, he would say things, and he would at times feign innocence, ignorance, and then make fun of the teacher. And in later life, he met a woman who remembers him in school. This was prior to the boys' school, obviously, but he notes it around this time in his autobiography that the woman remembers him, the teacher saying something, and him saying, no, that's not right, and then rushing home to get, I think, a book of some sort, or maybe a library book, and coming and proving his teacher was wrong. And he doesn't remember that, but he figures, yeah, that would have been him to do that. Now, also at the boys' high school, he had his first published piece of writing, and it was in the boys' high recorder, and he wrote it in the style of Robert, or he thought he wrote it in the style of Robert Benchley, who he liked, a humorous writer of the time, very popular writer, and it was called Little Brothers, and it's actually reprinted in here. And Before the Golden Age, he puts it in here. It's a very short piece. He was so proud to get this done because prior to that, because he was during a creative writing course that he was taking, and he was the first to one time to get up and read a piece that he wrote, and the teacher basically made fun of him, and he always remembered that, and also, but he got this. The teacher chose this piece to be in the paper, and he thought it was really good, but the little editorial that the teacher wrote was saying, well, I do apologize for the lack of quality of this piece, but it's the only one that was upbeat, and not a sort of sad story. And again, he never forgot that at all throughout his life, and he always thought he would, if he could go back in time to show this teacher his books, it was something that rankled with him for the rest of his life, basically, or at least up until the time he wrote his autobiography. And then 1955 came around. Being 15, he graduated the high school, and he tried to get into Columbia College to sort of to pave his way for medical school. However, at that time, he was riddled throughout teenage years. He was very skinny, and he had a lot of acne, and he was awkward. He even says, but he went to the interview at 15, and there's many reasons he figures he didn't get in to the Columbia College. And one of them being possibly that they had their quota of Jews, but also too they turned around and said, well, you had to be 16 to get in. But there's another college called Seth Low Junior College that he could go to. However, he found out that that their minimum was 16 years old too, but he was able to get in. So the person interviewing him was trying to sort of, fob him off, and he felt that there were other reasons for this. So, but there was another school, I think it was a Brooklyn or Queens High College, or New York College. There was another college that he could have gotten, and he actually started, but then they wondered why he didn't show up. But his father says, well, they couldn't afford the tuition, and they said, oh, well, here's a bursary, a grant, basically, of $100 to pay his way, and also he was able to do a part-time job. It was $15 a month, which helped greatly. So he switched over, and he started working there, and he did sort of so like biological sciences, like in his attempt to fulfill with his father to go to medical school. But he soon found out that he didn't really want to do that, and one of the things that made him think that was that they had to do dissections, and this is something that he regretted doing and remembered it for the rest of his life, that he had to kill a cat and then dissect it. And he just realized that's not going to be for him. But he did start taking chemistry, and he loved chemistry. He really, really loved chemistry. Uh, and but uh, yeah, after his father went with him to the interview to Columbia, but then after that, they sort of celebrated. They went around, they had lunch, they went to a gallery and so forth, and that they actually stopped at a museum, and Einstein was there. And they just sort of followed everybody, watching him. He never met him, but they just watched him for a little bit and followed him around. Um, and then in 1935, too, his father realized that he wanted to write, and just asked around customers and bought him an old Underwood full size typewriter for $10. And at this time, he started writing to Astounding, letters to Astounding, and he was starting to rank the stories, give them like a 1 to 5 star rating in a sense. And because only recently, well, 1928, many years before, he was able to start reading this material, even though his father had forbidden him to do it. But because there was one of the magazines that had science in it, he talked his father into having him read it. And then because his brother Stanley was being born, um, his father sort of allowed him to read everything then. So, and that's where he discovered science fiction, and it became very important for him. He would read the stories. He would tell the stories to other children at school, and he. But in 1935 was his first letter, and it was published with his address, and that was the thing at the time. The name and the full address were always published in these magazines. It's something that is, I'm sure a lot of people would be horrified today to hear that or to know that. He kept trying to write things. He'd already tried to write something earlier, but he tried to write like a science fiction novel, fantasy novel. He never got very far. Um, and also too, he like I say, earlier he started getting up into politics, interested, but in other events, world events. And in 1935, he was really caught up with the Huey P. Long assassination. Um, and it's described him as the most uh, Asimov described him later as the most dangerous demagogue in America until Joseph P. McCarthy came along. You got to wonder what he would think of the last 10 years. But anyway. At college, like I say, he took that was the zoology that he took, that he had to kill the cat, and he didn't like it, and he realized he didn't want to do this anymore. But he wanted to, because he wanted to satisfy his father for everything. So he went along. But then after the end of the first year, um, of that Seth Low College, it folded basically. So they, instead of getting rid of the students, they did bring them into um, Columbia College, but not as full students. So he always figured he was a second class student because of that. they were able to they did take the same courses, but he came out with what he figures was a second class degree, a Bachelor of Science, not a Bachelor of Arts, and but because of the long train ride, like he had the subway ride, he an hour each way to get to Columbia, he would read books, newspapers. He was interested in politics, but as I say, he fell in love with chemistry, uh, and then from about 36 to 38, like he just continued his studies and hoping to get into a medical school. But he also started writing his first science fiction story that he actually finished, and he called it Cosmic Corkscrew. It was a time travel story based on neutrinos, and that time is like a corkscrew. He describes it as a bed spring, so you could the hero could go from different period, like go instead of going in time, but he would just go sideways into another time period. And he wrote this, and he thought he thought it was good. So uh, 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 but he finally finished it in 1939, I think it was. But his first he was writing this in 38, and the sounding didn't show up one month, and he got very panicky about this. He contacted Street and Smith, and they told him, well, it's just it's been delayed or whatever, it'll be next week. And then it still didn't show up, so he started getting more because he wanted to get it published in there, and he thought this was the magazine that he had to get published in. So he went to their offices, and he was showed that they changed their printing schedule, and he was assured that this would come out. It was a couple tries, but then it finally did come out. So he was very happy with this. He was doing his final exams as well at the time, but he says he did well, even though he was obsessed with getting um, getting the magazine and read it before his exams. And but he finally finished um, Cosmic Corkscrew, but he didn't know how to send this. Like, he didn't know how you go about submitting something. And he thought about postage, but even it would cost him 12 cents, and that was a princely sum at the time because they were counting their pennies. This is the middle of the Depression. So he goes to his father, and up until this point, he never said he was, that he written something. And his father suggested, well, take it right to him. Take it to Campbell, see him and hand it to him. So he did this. His father allowed him, some time off from the store. So he already knew where the building was. And he goes there, and John W. Campbell actually saw him. John W. Campbell was 28, and so Asimov was 18. And he says he saw him because he remembers his name because he'd written several letters. So and also Campbell, Asimov says Campbell always wanted to talk to people, to have people listen to him. So he went in. They had a talk for an hour. He felt really good about it. He had another idea for a story, but he wanted to hear back from Campbell in the next few days regarding Cosmic Corkscrew. Uh, and then a couple days later, it came back, and uh, Campbell rejected it. His first story, he says it had a slow beginning, and he didn't like the suicide at the end, and he didn't like the first person narration, and he thought there was stiff dialogue. So he immediately, once he got it back, he started on another story called Stowaway, and and so and then that's the time he sort of really started losing interest in baseball. So he was devoting more time to writing, but he did it in the third person, and yeah, and then because of his letters to the uh, Astounding, he started getting some letters from other writers, and there was one R.R. Winterbottom, minor SF writer at the time, wrote to Asimov, and they began a correspondence. And his advice was don't revise too much, and he took that to heart, and did it that way. And he finally took Stowaway to Campbell. It was rejected. And then his third story that he started to write was called Marooned Off Vesta. Campbell rejected it again, and kept rejecting. But that story, his third story, was the first story that was actually published in Amazing Stories. He sent it to Amazing, and it was let's see. Yeah, so it was. Yeah, it was in 1939 that it was published. The year that he graduated with the Bachelor of Science. But also too in '38 uh, he was, as I say, he was writing stories. Writing letters, and he criticized Clifford Simak's Rule 18. He thought it was horrible, and because his address was there, Cliff Simak wrote him and said, well, what did you think was wrong with the story? And he thought, Simak wanted some feedback, a little more feedback about this. So uh, Asimov was shocked at this, and reread the story and realized that he was all wrong. It was that there was no transitions between changing of scenes or time, but he just left space between, and he thought it actually worked, and he thought it worked really well on rereading it. And he says that ever since then, because it's a very clear style of Simak that he tried to write, very much so in his style, in the Clifford Simak style. And he says, like, other people might, say Joyce is their inspiration and all this, and Asimov says it was clearly science fiction, that was his, because but pulp science fiction. So that's how his writing was. It didn't have women in it a lot of times. It took him a while to sort of incorporate that. It's because he didn't have interaction with women, and but it took him a while to get to that. And he says if he actually read 20th century literature and fiction, it might have been different, but he never did. So that's his first published story. As I say, was his third story written, and it's Marooned Off Vesta, and it was published in 1939, and he got $64 for it, and that's when he started applying for grad school, and that's where we'll end it there for this week, and we'll be back with uh, other stories. Well, actually, no. I'll end it here because he sold Ad Astra to Campbell, and it appeared under the name Trends, and that was for July 1939, and he got paid $69 for it. Did I say pounds for 64? No, it's $64. If I said pounds, sorry, it was $64 that he got Marooned Off Vesta, in Amazing Stories. But the first story that Campbell took was his Ad Astra story, which he changed the title to Trends, and that was in July 1939, and that was 1 penny per word, and um, yeah, and that issue also had A.E. Van Vogt's first story, Black Destroyer, which considered it also was considered to be the first issue of the Golden Age where Campbell had full editorial control for this. So that was in 1939. And the Black Destroyer as well has been considered the basis for the film Alien, and there was actually a court case regarding that and it was paid out of out of out of um, out of court. But also too during this, yeah, I want to say too is that he found out about a like fandom with groups, and because there was one person that was one boy that was in the boys' high school saw his name and letter his letters with his name and address in astounding. He invited him to the Queen's uh, science fiction club. But in between the time that he actually got there, that there was a split in that group, and Donald A. Wollheim and like Elsbreg de Camp and others, they wanted to be more having science fiction, fight fascism because it was around at the time. And the other faction didn't want to get into politics, and that was led by Sam Moskowitz, who Asimov eventually made friends with. But he went to the new group, the Splinter Group, which he didn't know at the time, but it was called the Futurians, and he remained a member there for a long time, or always, I think. But that's Donald A. Wollheim, Damon Knight was there, as I say, L. Sprague de Camp, Kornblut, and other writers, or that would be writers that would eventually come out of there. And that was a big thing for him because it was the first time that he actually met people that had sort of similar desires and burning to do things of writing and everything like that. And he remembered, and those are friendships that continued on. And he always said that friendships from school never did. They were friendships at school, but they didn't carry on. And it was from there that he carried friendships for the rest of his life. But that's where we'll end it. Him going to grad school, or applying for grad school. Take care, BookTube.